Colonel John completed his training at the Officer Training Academy in 1965 and was among the distinguished officers in the U.S. Army. He rose through the ranks and, upon his retirement in 1992, held the rank of colonel. During his time in France in the 1970s, he met a French girl, and after a brief period of encounters, he married her. They were happy together and had one child, whom they devoted themselves to raising and educating in the finest schools. Colonel John loved nature, so in 1983, while still in service, he bought a house in Ridge as a retreat to spend vacations with his family. The house sat on a plot of land exceeding 3,000 square meters, and after his retirement in 1992, he turned it into a veritable park, filling it with a variety of plants and trees. The colonel and his wife settled in this beautiful home and lived happily until she fell ill with a disease that gave her no more than 3 months to live, passing away in 1995. Now Colonel John was alone. In 2000, he considered hiring a maid. His driver, Daniel, began working for him in 1998. Daniel noticed the comfortable life the colonel led and envied him for it, while he himself struggled with financial hardship. A few months earlier, Daniel had married his cousin, Emily, a beautiful woman. When Daniel learned that the colonel wanted a woman skilled in cooking, an idea sparked in his mind. Why not have his wife take the job? He told the colonel he knew a woman who was an excellent cook and claimed she was his sister. The colonel agreed to hire Emily. At first, Daniel's only goal was to secure extra income. From Emily's first day in the summer of 2000, the rhythm of life in the colonel's house changed. The colonel sensed that the sadness lingering in the home since his wife's death began to fade. Emily was a masterful cook, introducing the colonel to dishes like pancakes and cream. From day one, she made sure to serve breakfast early, just as he liked. It seemed like the beginning of something new. Daniel had a multi-stage plan. He convinced his young wife, Emily, to go to extreme lengths, beyond what any sane person would accept, for money. Emily would deliberately enter the colonel's bedroom in transparent nightwear, claiming it was to avoid being late with breakfast. In the second phase, during the summer heat, Daniel suggested to Emily, who the colonel believed was his sister, that she sleep completely naked and delay waking up, staying in her room that morning. The colonel, as usual, woke early, expecting Emily to bring breakfast, but she didn't knock. After waiting a bit, he decided to check on her. He knocked on her door, which wasn't locked, and when he heard no response, he entered. There she was, naked. He stood stunned. Was he awake or dreaming? He approached the lithe figure lying on the bed, her eyes closed. Unable to control himself, he drew closer, and when his hands touched her body, she awoke in a panic, seemingly genuinely terrified. She began screaming, calling for Daniel to save her. Daniel rushed into the room as the colonel stood there. Emily screamed for Daniel to rescue her from the mad old man, as she claimed, begging him to take her home. What a scandal. It was all a scene from a play that Daniel believed his partner had performed perfectly as part of the plan. The colonel weakened before this scene, pleading with Daniel not to rush off. Emily pretended she wanted to leave, while Daniel acted as though the colonel's actions had angered him, declaring that, in solidarity with his sister, he would quit. The colonel begged him to convince Emily to stay. The image of Emily, as he had stumbled upon her in her room, stuck in his mind, a fire consuming him, reawakening a masculinity he thought had died with his French wife. He insisted that Emily stay and that Daniel not leave. Daniel pretended that, out of respect for the years he'd served the colonel, he wouldn't abandon him immediately and would stay until a replacement driver was found. But in reality, there was another stage to the plan. Emily temporarily moved to her father's house in Brooks, but the colonel was smitten with her. In September 2000, He consulted a psychiatrist and recounted the story. The psychiatrist advised him to marry her to legitimize his feelings. Daniel controlled access to Emily, so the colonel asked him to arrange the marriage. Daniel stalled for a few days, and the wait was agonizing for the colonel. Daniel then set up the next phase of his plan, and Emily agreed to continue the game. Ultimately, she was working to claim a share of the colonel's wealth. On the seventh day of negotiations, Daniel arrived with Emily. The colonel welcomed them into the living room, and when he broached the subject of marriage, Emily whispered to Daniel to set the terms. The colonel handed her $5,000 in cash as an engagement gift, and they married in a simple civil ceremony in October 2000. In the days that followed, she indulged him with various forms of pleasure, but his age couldn't keep up with her youth. His strength gradually waned, and Emily's plan was to push the old man to overdose on Viagra. She and Daniel were confident the drug would hasten his demise. Emily urged her husband to gift her supposed brother, Daniel, a house for shelter. The colonel complied, giving Daniel a dilapidated house on land that had become valuable real estate. Before the gift's paperwork was finalized, Emily forced Daniel, who had dragged her deep into this scheme, to sign a debt acknowledgement in her favor. She didn't want to lose her share of the spoils. The colonel became addicted to Viagra, and on a winter night in 2001, specifically January 15, he passed away. Emily summoned Daniel, who searched the room and discovered the colonel had a bank account with nearly $100,000. Daniel took a check from the checkbook, forged the colonel's signature from a document he found, and wrote a $35,000 check. Emily took cash from a safe the colonel always kept locked. They went to their home in Brooks, hiding their loot. Later, Daniel cashed the forged check at the bank without issue, the clerk noting his ID number on the back. The colonel's death was announced. Emily called Thomas, the colonel's son, who had been living far from his father, and informed him that his father had died. He asked her not to touch anything in the room. He contacted the colonel's doctor, who confirmed the death occurred over 12 hours earlier. Finding several empty Viagra packets on the bedside table, he assumed an overdose was the cause. Seeing Daniel standing beside the colonel's widow, the doctor recalled prescribing Viagra to him months earlier for alleged impotence. Finding his presence odd, the doctor spoke privately with Thomas, urging him to transfer his father's body to the morgue for a thorough examination. The coroner's autopsy revealed the colonel had been dead for over 24 hours, with excessive Viagra use as the cause. Whether he took it willingly or was forced remained unclear. Suspicions led the prosecutor to refer the case to the criminal police. During questioning, Emily claimed the colonel insisted on taking Viagra. Investigators visited Brooks to interview her father, an elderly man who erupted in anger over her relationship with her cousin Daniel. From the bedroom safe, which Emily provided the key for, they collected property deeds and checkbooks, sparking a deeper investigation. Under pressure, Emily confessed, and all evidence pointed to her and Daniel's involvement in the colonel's death. Suddenly, two officers entered the office, one visibly shaken, whispering something to the chief that Emily couldn't hear. The chief seemed eager to wrap up the interrogation. Emily shocked him, asking, "Is that wretch Daniel dead?" When he asked how she knew, she admitted she'd poisoned him that night after returning from the bank. Revenge for her honor and punishment for selling her cheaply to the colonel.